December 15th, 1987, 2:17 a.m. In a greasy truck stop diner in Aberdeen, Washington, a mysterious stranger sat down across from a nobody named Kurt Cobain and revealed his entire future with terrifying accuracy. What this man told Kurt that night would predict every detail of his rise to fame, his marriage, his daughter, and the exact date he would die. Now I'm going to tell you the story that explains everything about Kurt Cobain's tragic destiny. Picture this scene, Aberdeen, Washington, 1987. The most soul-crushing logging town you can imagine. Rain-soaked streets, lined with boarded-up shops, unemployment through the roof, and dreams dying faster than the timber industry. This was Kurt Cobain's world, a gray nightmare where creativity went to die. Imagine the desperation Kurt felt that night. Just hours earlier, he'd been fired from his janitorial job for nodding off while mopping floors. His supervisor had screamed, "You're a disgrace." The irony wasn't lost on Kurt. His parents hadn't spoken to him in months, too ashamed of their drug-addicted son. Can you feel the hopelessness washing over him? A 20-year-old heroin addict with $12.43 in his pocket, holes in his sneakers, nowhere to sleep. He was carrying his beat-up guitar in a trash bag because he couldn't afford a case. Inside his head, melodies swirled constantly. Nice, angry, beautiful, desperate songs nobody wanted to hear. Picture him walking aimlessly through empty streets at midnight, stomach cramping from withdrawal. He'd spent his last $20 on a fix 2 days ago. The rain never stopped in the Pacific Northwest, tonight coming down like tears Kurt was too proud to shed. At 2:17 a.m., Kurt pushed open the door of Mel's truck stop. But what happened next would change music history forever. But who was the stranger that would alter Kurt's destiny? And how could he possibly know things that hadn't happened yet? Fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects overhead, casting everyone in sickly yellow glow. Behind the counter waitress Dolores was chain-smoking and reading romance novels. 3 truckers occupied separate booths, each lost in private misery. Kurt slumped into his usual corner booth and started writing lyrics about pain, about feeling like an outsider, about wanting to escape Aberdeen but having nowhere to go. That's when he walked in. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the door chimed and Kurt looked up to see someone who clearly didn't belong in Aberdeen. The man was tall, probably 6'3", with elegant bearing that seemed otherworldly. His long gray hair was pulled back perfectly, and he wore an expensive black wool coat. But it was the stranger's eyes that stopped Kurt cold. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and they seemed to see everything past your surface, past your lies, straight into the darkest corners of your soul. When those eyes locked onto Kurt's, the young musician felt like he was being examined by something not entirely human. Without hesitation, the stranger walked directly to Kurt's booth and slid into the seat across from him. "You're Kurt Cobain," the man said. His voice was soft but carried perfectly. It wasn't a question. Can you imagine Kurt's confusion? A well-dressed stranger in Aberdeen at 3 a.m. somehow knowing his name. Kurt's pen stopped moving. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know you. I've been looking for you." The stranger's accent was unplaceable. "My name is Vincent Thorne. I'm what you might call a talent scout, though not the conventional variety. But how could a talent scout find Kurt Cobain in this forgotten corner of America?" Vincent reached into his coat and pulled out a leather notebook that looked ancient. The cover was worn smooth from handling, edges yellowed with age. When he opened it, Kurt could see pages of handwritten notes in multiple languages. "Let me tell you what I know about you," Vincent said, flipping to a page with Kurt's name written in elegant script. What came next would shatter everything Kurt thought he knew about reality. "Born February 20th, 1967, Grays Harbor Hospital. Parents Donald and Wendy Cobain, divorced when you were 8. Currently unemployed as of 12 hours ago. Currently addicted to heroin. currently sleeping on Tracy Miranda's couch when she lets you under the North Aberdeen Bridge when she doesn't. Kurt's hands started shaking. Nobody knew about the bridge. That was his secret sanctuary. You're interested in Buddhism because you're searching for meaning in suffering. You have chronic stomach pain doctors can't diagnose. You've attempted suicide twice, pills at 14, railroad tracks at 17. Vincent's pale eyes never left Kurt's face. Imagine the terror coursing through Kurt's veins. How do you know all this? Vincent smiled, because I know what you're going to become. I know every album you're going to make, every song you're going to write. I know about the woman you're going to marry, the daughter you're going to have, and the note you're going to leave behind. The diner seemed to grow quieter, as if the universe was holding its breath. But this was just the beginning. The real shock was yet to come. Vincent turned several pages, revealing detailed timelines and dates. Picture this moment: a complete stranger mapping out your entire future with impossible accuracy. Within 6 months, you'll reconcile with Chris Novoselic, that bassist you've been avoiding, together with a drummer you haven't met yet. Dave Grohl from Washington, D.C. You'll form a band that will change the world. Chris and I aren't even talking, Kurt protested. You will be. You'll call the band several names before settling on something that comes to you in meditation about escaping pain, Nirvana. Can you feel the electricity in that moment? Kurt had never heard that word used as a band name, but something about it resonated like a struck bell. Vincent continued reading with terrifying precision. In June 1988, you'll record your first demo with Chris and drummer Dale Crover. In 1989, you'll sign with Sub Pop Records. Your first album will be called Bleach, and it will cost exactly $606.17 to record. Imagine Kurt's bewilderment. He'd never heard of Sub Pop Records. The album will sell about 40,000 copies over 2 years. Impressive for indie release, but nothing compared to what's coming. In 1990, Dave Grohl joins the band, and suddenly you have the rhythm section you've been dreaming of. Vincent's voice dropped to a whisper. In 1991, you'll sign with BGC Records. Your second album will be called Nevermind, and it will feature a song that destroys your life. What song? Smells Like Teen Spirit. But what Vincent revealed next would prove even more shocking. Kurt couldn't help himself. He laughed. Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's the stupidest song title I've ever heard. Vincent's expression remained deadly serious. The title will come from graffiti that Kathleen Hanna writes on your wall of Kurt Smells Like Teen Spirits, referring to a deodorant brand you don't know exists. You'll misinterpret it as a political statement. Can you imagine how surreal this must have felt? A stranger describing future events involving people Kurt had never met. The song itself will be an accident. You'll write it as a quiet piece, but when Chris plays the bass line and Dave adds thunderous drums, it becomes an anthem. The chorus will be nonsense syllables. Here we are now, entertain us. But millions of kids will hear their own frustration. Vincent flipped to another page. MTV will put the video in heavy rotation in September 1991. Within 3 months, Neverminds will knock Michael Jackson's Dangerous off the #1 spot. You'll sell 10 million copies. Picture Kurt's amazement. He was sitting in a truck stop diner, broke and addicted, being told he would outsell the king of pop. But success will feel like the worst thing that ever happens to you. You'll become the reluctant spokesman for Generation X. Every magazine will want to interview you. Every photographer will want to capture your authentic pain. Can you feel the weight of this revelation? Fame is a curse rather than a blessing. But Vincent wasn't finished. The darkest predictions were still to come. Vincent turned to a section marked with red ink. Imagine seeing your romantic future mapped out by a complete stranger. In 1992, you'll meet Courtney Love from the band Hole at a nightclub in Los Angeles. She'll be everything you think you want. Chaotic, artistic, dangerous, beautiful in a damaged way that mirrors your own brokenness. I don't even like girls like that, Kurt said weakly. You will like her. She'll understand your music in ways that other people don't. You'll marry her in February 1992 on a beach in Hawaii, both wearing vintage dresses. Vincent's expression darkened. Picture the ominous shift in atmosphere. The marriage will be passionate and destructive in equal measure. Together, you'll push each other toward harder drugs, more extreme behavior, and ultimately mutual destruction. In August 1992, Courtney will give birth to your daughter, Frances Bean Cobain. You'll love that little girl more than your own life, but your addiction will make you feel unworthy of being her father. Child Protective Services will investigate your family. Can you imagine Kurt's horror? The idea of having a daughter, of potentially harming her through his addiction. The media will turn your family into a circus. Photographers will camp outside your house. Reporters will offer money to your drug dealers for stories. But the most chilling prediction was yet to come. Vincent closed his notebook and leaned forward. Picture this moment, your entire fate being sealed by a stranger's words. You have a choice, Kurt. You can walk away from music right now, find a normal job, get clean, live to see your 40th birthday, or you can pursue your musical dreams. You'll create some of the most important rock music ever recorded. He paused, letting the weight settle. But if you choose that path, you'll die by your own hand on April 5th, 1994. You'll be 27 years old. You'll reach a point where the gap between who you are and who the world wants you to be becomes unbearable. Can you feel the ice-cold terror of hearing your exact death date? Vincent pulled out a small piece of paper and wrote something. This is the opening line of a song you haven't written yet. You'll write it in 1993. He slid the paper across the table, written in neat handwriting. I take pride as the king of illusion. Kurt stared at the paper. The words felt familiar somehow. How could you possibly know lyrics I haven't written? Because time isn't linear, Kurt. You're going to write those words about yourself, about how fame turned you into something you never wanted to be. But what happened next would prove even more disturbing. Vincent stood up from the booth. Picture this moment of ultimate decision. So what's it going to be, Kurt Cobain? Safety or greatness? A long, quiet life or a short, brilliant one that changes everything? Kurt looked down at the piece of paper, then back up. What if I pursue music but try to avoid all the bad stuff? Vincent's smile was infinitely sad. You can't have the light without the darkness. Your pain is what will make your music authentic. Without it, you'd just be another guy with a guitar. The stranger walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. When you write your final note in 1994, you'll remember this conversation. You'll understand that everything I told you came true, and you'll realize that even knowing the future, you couldn't change it. With that, Vincent Thorne walked out into the rain and disappeared. But what Kurt discovered next would shake him to his core. Kurt sat in that booth until sunrise, staring at the piece of paper. When Dolores came to refill his coffee, she mentioned something that made Kurt's blood run cold. You were having a whole conversation with an empty booth for 3 hours, honey. Kurt looked across from him with growing horror. The booth was indeed empty. There was no second coffee cup, no sign that anyone else had been there. But the piece of paper was real. The handwriting was different from his own, and somehow Kurt knew that everything the stranger had told him would come true. Can you imagine the psychological weight? Had he hallucinated the encounter, or had something supernatural just occurred? The most terrifying part wasn't the possibility that he'd lost his mind. It was the possibility that he hadn't. Over the following years, Kurt would pull out that piece of paper whenever Vincent's predictions materialized with impossible accuracy. When he formed Nirvana, when they recorded Bleach for exactly $606.17, when Smells Like Teen Spirit became an unexpected phenomenon. Picture the growing horror as each prophecy fulfilled itself exactly as predicted. In 1993, during recording sessions for In Utero, Kurt wrote Serve the Servants. The opening line was exactly what Vincent had written 6 years earlier: "I take pride as the king of illusion." As he sang those words, Kurt remembered the stranger's warning. The prophecy was completing itself. Friends noticed that Kurt would sometimes talk about meeting someone who had predicted his entire future. Most dismissed it as drug-induced paranoia. But those closest to him observed something chilling. Kurt seemed to be following a predetermined script. Can you imagine living your life knowing every major event before it happens? The psychological torture of predetermined fate. But the final revelation would prove most shocking of all. On April 5th, 1994, exactly as Vincent Thorne had predicted, Kurt Cobain's body was discovered in his Seattle home. Among his possessions, investigators found a worn piece of paper with handwriting that didn't match any samples. Written on it was the line, "I take pride as the king of illusion," and a note in Kurt's handwriting: "Vincent was right about everything. I couldn't change it." To this day, no one has been able to identify who Vincent Thorne was. Security cameras at Mel's truck stop from 1987 were destroyed in a fire. There's no record of anyone by that name anywhere. But the piece of paper was real. The predictions were impossibly accurate. And Kurt Cobain lived and died exactly as a mysterious stranger said he would. Picture the chilling implications. Was Vincent Thorne supernatural, a time traveler, or was he simply a figment of Kurt's imagination that somehow possessed knowledge of events that hadn't happened yet? Perhaps the most terrifying aspect is the possibility that Kurt could have chosen differently. That December night in 1987, he had the chance to walk away from music and live a normal life. Instead, he chose greatness, knowing it would destroy him. In the end, Vincent Thorne represented something far more frightening than death itself: the terrible burden of genius, the knowledge that the very gifts that make us special are often the same ones that tear us apart. The question that haunts everyone who hears this story: if you could see your future with perfect accuracy, would you have the courage to change it? Or would you, like Kurt Cobain, choose destiny over safety, even knowing the price you'd have to pay?